The massive briefing hall aboard the GSS Meridian buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the holographic display. Commander Thax 9, a towering Zilonian with crystalline scales that reflected the room's harsh lighting, stood at attention before the assembled crowd. His forearms moved in precise gestures as he addressed the mixed group of soldiers, pilots, and specialists. The situation on Kepler 442b has deteriorated beyond our worst projections. Thax 9's voice resonated through the translation matrix, reaching every being in their native tongue. The Vorthon Empire has established a foothold in the northern continent, and their plasma artillery positions are systematically destroying our evacuation routes. The hologram shifted, showing a three-dimensional map of the contested planet. Red markers indicated enemy positions, while blue dots showed the locations of trapped civilian populations. The scale of the disaster was immediately apparent to everyone present. "We need precision strikes on 17 hardened positions," Thax 9 continued, his secondary arms highlighting each target. "The Vorthon have anti-orbital defenses that make capital ship bombardment impossible. This requires atmospheric fighters with pilots skilled enough to navigate their energy barriers and accurate enough to hit targets no larger than a storage container." A ripple of concerned chittering and clicking filled the air as the various species processed this information. The Aquari delegation's tentacles swayed nervously while the insectoid Kythera's antennae twitched in what their species considered deep contemplation. "The atmospheric conditions make this particularly challenging," added Dr. Vess, a Terran scientist whose small frame seemed almost insignificant among the larger alien species. "Kepler 442b has constant electrical storms and gravity wells that shift unpredictably. We've lost 3 reconnaissance drones just trying to map the approach vectors." Commander, Thax 9's primary eyes swept across the assembled group while his secondary eyes remained fixed on the tactical display. "I need to know what resources we have available. The time window for this operation is closing rapidly." One by one, the various military representatives stood to report their capabilities. The Zilonian squadron leader spoke of his pilot's experience with energy weapon systems. The Kythera mentioned their natural ability to process multiple sensory inputs simultaneously. The Aquari discussed their pilots' expertise in fluid dynamics and their intuitive understanding of atmospheric currents. Each report was met with polite acknowledgement, but it became increasingly clear that none of the available forces had the specific combination of skills needed for such a dangerous mission. The enemy positions were too well defended, the environmental conditions too unpredictable, and the margin for error too small. As the reports concluded, a heavy silence settled over the room. The weight of potential failure pressed down on everyone present. Millions of civilians were trapped on the planet's surface, and with each passing hour, more evacuation sites were being discovered and destroyed by Vorthon forces. Commander Thax 9's crystalline scales dulled slightly, a sign of stress among his species. "Are there any other options we haven't considered? Any specialized pilots or units that might be suited for this type of operation?" The Terran delegation had remained notably quiet throughout most of the briefing. There were only 5 humans present, a small number compared to the dozens of representatives from other species. They sat in the back corner, their simple military uniforms contrasting sharply with the elaborate ceremonial armor and biosuits worn by their alien counterparts. It was then that Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen noticed something. The lead human representative, a weathered man with short-cropped gray hair and intense blue eyes, had been studying the tactical display with unusual focus. His nameplate read CMDR Reese, and beneath it, barely visible, were small insignia that made Chen's breath catch. Navy SEALs were legendary even among humans, but their reputation hadn't spread much beyond Earth's military circles. Most alien species viewed human soldiers as competent but unremarkable, lacking the specialized physical adaptations that gave other species their combat advantages. Commander Reese stood slowly, his movement drawing attention from the nearby Terran delegates. The aliens barely noticed the human rising from his seat, as they were still engaged in hushed discussions about alternative strategies and acceptable loss ratios. "Commander Thax 9, Reese's voice cut through the ambient conversation with quiet authority. "Before we proceed with casualty estimates, I'd like to ask a direct question." The Zilonian's 4 eyes focused on the human representative. Proceed, Commander Reese. Do you have any combat pilots here with experience in high-risk atmospheric operations? The question seemed redundant given the previous hour of capability briefings, but something in Reese's tone suggested he had a specific reason for asking. The alien commanders exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication creating a subtle undercurrent of confusion. As we've established, Thax 9 replied with barely concealed impatience, our current pilot roster lacks the specific skill set required for this mission profile. Reese nodded slowly, then asked his second question with the same measured delivery. Any pilots with experience in contested airspace operations? This time, several of the alien commanders shifted uncomfortably. The question was becoming pointed, and while they had pilots with combat experience, the type of precision flying required for this mission was beyond their current capabilities. Commander Reese, Dr. Vess interjected diplomatically, we appreciate the Terran delegation's concern, but we've already assessed our available resources. The SEAL leader's expression remained neutral as he asked his final question, the one that would change everything. Any conflict pilots here? The phrasing was unusual even by human standards. Most species referred to their military aviators as combat pilots or war pilots, but the term conflict pilots suggested something different. It implied experience in situations where the rules of engagement were unclear, where survival depended on adaptability rather than superior technology. The room fell completely silent as the various commanders realized they had no clear answer to offer. Their pilots were skilled, certainly, but the type of experience Reese was asking about seemed to require something beyond conventional military training. It was in that moment of collective uncertainty that a figure in the far corner of the human delegation quietly stood up. She had been so still and unremarkable that most of the aliens hadn't even noticed her presence. Her flight suit bore the simple rank insignia of a lieutenant, and her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail. Without saying a word, she began walking toward the exit, her footsteps barely audible on the metal decking. The movement was so subtle and unexpected that it took several seconds for anyone to process what was happening. As she reached the door, every eye in the room was following her quiet departure, and a new understanding began to dawn on the assembled commanders about what they might have just witnessed. Commander Thax 9's crystalline scales rippled with confusion as he watched the human female disappear through the exit. The briefing room remained frozen in an awkward silence, with dozens of eyes still focused on the now empty doorway. The Zilonian's forearms gestured uncertainly as he tried to process what had just occurred. Should we continue with the mission planning? Dr. Vess asked tentatively, her voice barely above a whisper. Commander Reese remained standing, his weathered features showing the slightest hint of what might have been satisfaction. I think we should wait a moment, he said calmly. Lieutenant Torres will be back. The alien commanders exchanged confused glances. The Kithara delegation began rapid antenna movements that indicated intense discussion in their subsonic communication range. The Aquari representatives' tentacles writhed in patterns that suggested growing frustration with human unpredictability. Commander Reese, Thax 9's voice carried a note of strained patience. We have a rapidly deteriorating tactical situation. If the Terran delegation has relevant information to share, now would be the appropriate time. Before Reese could respond, the briefing room's main display suddenly activated without input from any of the present commanders. The holographic projector hummed to life, casting new images into the air above the assembled group. Technical specifications began scrolling across multiple screens, showing aircraft configurations that none of the alien species recognized. What is this? Demanded Squadron Leader Vexhai of the Zilonian Air Corps, his secondary arms pointing at the display. These are not standard Alliance fighter configurations. The technical readouts showed a sleek atmospheric fighter with unusual modifications. The weapon systems were configured for precision rather than raw firepower, and the engine specifications suggested capabilities that bordered on the impossible. Most notably, the craft appeared to be designed for single-pilot operation in conditions that would normally require a full crew. Dr. Vess leaned forward, studying the data with growing amazement. These performance parameters can't be accurate. No biological pilot could withstand these acceleration forces, and the reaction times required for this type of maneuvering are beyond known physiological limits. The door to the briefing room hissed open, and Lieutenant Torres walked back in carrying a small data pad, and wearing a different expression. Where before she had seemed almost invisible in her quiet stillness, now there was something in her bearing that commanded attention. Her dark eyes swept the room with the confidence of someone who had already assessed every tactical element present. "Ma'am," Commander Thax 9 addressed her directly for the first time. "We're reviewing some technical specifications that appeared on our display system. Do you have information relevant to this mission?" Torres approached the holographic display and touched her data pad to the interface console. Immediately, the projector began showing new images, real footage from previous combat operations. The assembled commanders watched in stunned silence as they saw atmospheric fighters performing maneuvers that defied their understanding of physics and pilot endurance. "These recordings are from the Titan conflict," Torres said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that seemed disproportionate to her rank. "Atmospheric combat in a gravity well 3 times Earth normal, with constant storms and enemy fighters using phase shift technology." The footage showed a single fighter weaving through energy barriers while delivering precision strikes on hardened targets. The pilot's reaction times were impossibly fast, and the aircraft seemed to bend the laws of aerodynamics with every turn. What was most remarkable was how the fighter used the environmental conditions to its advantage rather than simply fighting against them. The Vorthan energy barriers operate on the same basic principles as the Titan defense systems, Torres continued, manipulating the display to show comparative technical analyses. The atmospheric conditions on Kepler 442b are actually less challenging than what we dealt with in the outer Jupiter moons. Squadron Leader Vexhi's scales had shifted to a deep blue color that indicated profound respect among his species. These maneuvers require reaction times measured in milliseconds. "What type of pilot enhancement technology do humans use?" Torres glanced at Commander Reese, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "No technology," she replied simply. "Just training." The Kithra delegation erupted in agitated clicking sounds. Their species prided itself on having the fastest reflexes in known space, with nerve conduction velocities that exceeded most other biological forms. The idea that unenhanced humans could outperform their natural advantages challenged their fundamental understanding of biological capabilities. "Impossible," declared HiveMind Kextra through the translation matrix. "Our neural networks have been optimized for rapid response over millions of years of evolution. No single brain organism can match our processing speed." Torres accessed another file on her datapad, and the display showed detailed biometric readings from human pilots during combat operations. Heart rates, neural activity, stress hormone levels, and reaction times were all documented with scientific precision. "Human pilots don't try to match your processing speed," Torres explained patiently. "We use pattern recognition and intuitive response systems that bypass conscious thought entirely. It's not about thinking faster, it's about not having to think at all." Dr. Vess was frantically taking notes on her own device, clearly fascinated by the implications. "You're describing what we would call flow-state psychology, but applied to combat piloting. The theoretical paper suggests this might be possible, but we've never seen it demonstrated at this level." The holographic display shifted again, showing the 17 target locations on Kepler 442b, alongside optimal approach vectors. Torres had apparently spent the few minutes she was absent, running preliminary calculations and mission planning. The attack routes she proposed used the planet's electrical storms as concealment and the gravity wells as acceleration assists. "The mission is feasible," Torres stated matter-of-factly. "Single pilot operation using a modified Raptor-class fighter. Estimated mission duration 4 hours, including ingress, target engagement, and extraction." Commander Thax 9's 4 eyes focused intently on the human pilot. "Lieutenant Torres, are you volunteering for this operation?" "I'm stating that I can complete it," Torres replied, the distinction clear in her tone. "Whether I'm assigned to the mission is your decision." The HFY delegation leader, Elder Flux Denna, undulated his tentacles in what served as his species' equivalent of applause. "The confidence is admirable, but this mission profile has a projected survival rate of less than 12%, even with our best pilots." Torres looked directly at the HFY elder, her expression unchanged. "Your best pilots aren't human." The simple statement carried no arrogance or boastfulness, just a clear assessment of capabilities. It was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to comment on the weather or the time of day. Around the room, Alien commanders began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just military capability. It was a fundamental difference in how humans approached impossible challenges. Where other species saw insurmountable obstacles, this human pilot saw an interesting problem to solve. Commander Reese finally spoke again, his voice carrying decades of experience with exactly this type of situation. "Gentlemen, ladies, and distinguished beings," he said formally, "I believe we have our pilot." The hangar bay of the GSS Meridian hummed with activity as technicians from multiple species worked to prepare Lieutenant Torres's fighter for the mission. The sleek Raptor-class aircraft had been extensively modified according to specifications that Torres had provided, alterations that had left the alien engineering teams both impressed and bewildered. Chief Engineer Colthara, a massive Bronthan whose 6 arms moved with surprising delicacy as he calibrated the fighter's systems, rumbled his confusion through the translation matrix. "Lieutenant Torres, these weapon modifications reduce your overall firepower by 30%. Standard tactical doctrine suggests maximizing destructive capability." Torres crouched beside the landing gear, inspecting the specialized modifications to the aircraft's maneuvering systems. "I don't need to destroy the targets," she replied without looking up. "I need to disable them with surgical precision while avoiding civilian casualties in the surrounding areas." The Bronthan's rocky features shifted into what his species considered a frown. "But surely more weapons provide better options for completing the mission." "More weapons mean more weight, which reduces maneuverability," Torres explained patiently. "In atmospheric combat, the ability to change direction quickly is worth more than additional firepower." Dr. Vess approached with a tablet full of atmospheric readings from Kepler 442b. "Lieutenant, I've been studying the storm patterns on the target planet. The electrical discharges are severe enough to disrupt most targeting systems. How do you plan to maintain weapons accuracy in those conditions?" Torres accepted the tablet and scrolled through the data quickly, her dark eyes moving across the information with practiced efficiency. "I won't be using the targeting systems," she said simply. The statement caused several nearby technicians to pause in their work. The idea of engaging hardened military targets without computer-assisted targeting was considered nearly impossible by most species' military doctrine. "Manual targeting?" Dr. Vess asked, her voice rising slightly. "At the speeds you'll be traveling, with the atmospheric interference, the probability of successful target engagement drops to statistical insignificance." Torres handed the tablet back and resumed her inspection of the fighter systems. "Human pilots trained for atmospheric combat don't rely on probability calculations. We use visual reference points, instinctive range estimation, and pattern recognition developed through thousands of hours of practice." Commander Reese approached the group, having spent the last several hours in secure communications with Earth Command. His expression was serious as he watched Torres work. "Lieutenant, I have updated intelligence on the Vorthon positions. They've reinforced 3 of the primary targets with additional energy barriers." Torres nodded without seeming concerned. "Expected countermeasures. The barrier generators have a cyclic vulnerability window of approximately 1.3 seconds during power fluctuations. The timing is predictable once you understand their energy management protocols." Chief Engineer Colthara's 6 arms gestured in astonishment. "You can calculate barrier vulnerabilities during high-speed combat maneuvers?" "I don't calculate them," Torres replied. "I feel them." The distinction seemed lost on most of the alien personnel, but Commander Reese understood exactly what she meant. The best human pilots operated on levels that transcended conscious analysis, responding to subtle cues and patterns that couldn't be programmed into computers or explained through conventional training manuals. Squadron Leader. Vexhai arrived with a delegation of Zolonian pilots who had specifically requested to observe the humans' pre-flight procedures. Their crystalline scales were exhibiting rapid color changes that indicated intense curiosity and professional interest. "Lieutenant Torres," Vexhai addressed her formally, "my pilots have studied the mission parameters extensively. We believe the approach vectors you've chosen are suboptimal. The storm systems will create significant turbulence that could compromise your attack runs." Torres looked up from her equipment check, considering the Zolonian's concern. "Your pilots are thinking about fighting against the storms," she said thoughtfully. "I'm planning to use them as camouflage and navigational aids. To demonstrate, Torres activated a portable holographic projector, and began showing how the electrical discharges could be used to mask her fighter's energy signature from enemy sensors. More remarkably, she explained how the turbulence patterns could actually be used to increase her speed and maneuverability if approached correctly. The storm systems follow predictable patterns based on the planet's magnetic field fluctuations, Torres continued, manipulating the hologram to show energy flow patterns. Instead of fighting the turbulence, I'll use it to slingshot between targets and reduce my overall flight time. The assembled alien pilots watched in fascination as Torres outlined maneuvers that used natural phenomena as tactical advantages. Her approach to atmospheric combat was fundamentally different from anything in their tactical databases. Dr. Vess had been recording the entire explanation for later analysis. Lieutenant, the forces involved in these maneuvers would subject you to acceleration loads beyond normal human tolerance. How do you plan to maintain consciousness during these stress events? Torres smiled for the first time since the mission briefing began. Humans are surprisingly adaptable when properly trained. SEALs learn to function in conditions that would incapacitate most people. SEALs. Vexhi's translator had difficulty with the term. Commander Reese stepped forward with obvious pride in his voice. Sea, Air, and Land Special Operations Forces. Lieutenant Torres completed advanced combat training in all three environments before specializing in atmospheric warfare. The revelation caused a stir among the alien personnel. Most species specialized in single environments due to the physical adaptations required for peak performance. The idea of training for optimal function in multiple extreme conditions was foreign to their military thinking. Chief Engineer Colthera completed his final systems check and rumbled his approval. All modifications are complete and tested, Lieutenant. The fighter is operating within specified parameters. Torres nodded and began putting on her flight suit, a specialized garment that looked deceptively simple compared to the elaborate life support systems used by other species pilots. The alien observers were surprised to see how minimal her equipment appeared to be. Your survival gear seems insufficient for the mission parameters, observed Elder Flux Denna, who had arrived to witness the departure preparations. Most pilots require extensive life support systems for atmospheric combat in extreme conditions. Torres checked her gear methodically, each movement precise and practiced. Human physiology is more resilient than most species realize. We evolved on a planet with variable gravity, extreme weather, and hostile environmental conditions. This mission is challenging, but it's within normal human operational parameters. The statement was delivered matter-of-factly, but it highlighted something the alien forces were beginning to understand about humanity. Where other species had evolved specialized advantages for specific environments, humans had developed adaptability as their primary survival trait. Commander Thax 9 approached for the final mission briefing, his forearms carrying updated intelligence reports. Lieutenant Torres, reconnaissance shows the Vorthan have deployed hunter-killer squadrons around the target areas. You'll be facing active enemy fighter opposition during your attack runs. Torres accepted the reports and reviewed them quickly. Vorthan fighters are fast and well-armed, but they're designed for space combat. In atmosphere, especially in storm conditions, their advantages become disadvantages. How so? Asked Dr. Vess, genuinely curious about the tactical analysis. They're too rigid in their approach, Torres explained. Vorthan pilots follow programmed attack patterns and rely heavily on their technological advantages. In unpredictable atmospheric conditions, flexibility beats superior technology. As Torres climbed into her fighter's cockpit, she looked remarkably calm for someone about to undertake what every military analyst considered a suicide mission. The alien personnel watched with a mixture of admiration and disbelief as she began her pre-flight checklist with the same routine efficiency she had shown throughout the preparation process. Commander Reese approached the fighter for a final word with his pilot. Lieutenant, Earth Command sends their regards and reminds you that discretion is the better part of valor. Torres looked down at her commander with a slight smile. Copy that, sir. But sometimes valor is the only option available. The canopy closed with a soft hiss and the fighter's engines began their startup sequence. In a few moments, Lieutenant Torres would be launching into what might be the most dangerous atmospheric combat mission ever attempted. Around the hangar, alien personnel prepared to witness whether human adaptability and training could succeed where superior technology and specialized evolution had failed. The atmospheric entry into Kepler 442b was unlike anything the monitoring teams aboard the GSS Meridian had ever witnessed. Lieutenant Torres's fighter cut through the planet's upper atmosphere with a precision that defied conventional piloting wisdom, using the initial friction and heat buildup as camouflage against enemy detection systems. Commander Thax 9 stood before the main tactical display, his 4 eyes tracking the single blue dot that represented Torres's fighter as it disappeared into the planet's storm-racked atmosphere. "Telemetry signal is degrading as expected," reported Lieutenant Kexhai from the communications station. "We're losing detailed tracking data." Dr. Vess monitored the specialized sensors that had been configured to track human biosignatures. "Her physiological readings are remarkably stable," she observed with fascination. "Heart rate elevated but steady. Stress hormones within normal combat parameters. Most pilots would be experiencing severe anxiety responses by now." The first indication that Torres had reached the combat zone came not from their instruments, but from intercepted Vorthon communications. The alien monitoring team listened through their translation matrices as confused enemy reports began flooding their networks. "Unknown contact, moving through Sector 7, came the first transmission. "Energy signature inconsistent with known Alliance fighter types." Commander Reese stood quietly beside the communication station, his weathered features showing no emotion as he listened to the enemy chatter. He had heard similar confusion in enemy communications before, during operations where human pilots employed tactics that defied conventional military understanding. The second Vorthon transmission came minutes later, tinged with something approaching panic. "Contact is using storm systems for concealment. Unable to maintain target lock. Requesting additional hunter units for Sector 7. She's already engaging the enemy," Thax 9 observed, his crystalline scales shifting to colors that indicated professional admiration. "The Vorthon fighter squadrons are having difficulty tracking her movement patterns." Dr. Vess leaned forward as new data streams began appearing on her monitors. "I'm detecting multiple energy discharges consistent with weapons fire, but the patterns are unlike anything in our tactical databases. The engagement vectors are extremely unconventional." What they were seeing represented a fundamental difference in combat philosophy, where most species approached atmospheric warfare as an extension of space combat. Torres was treating it as a 3-dimensional puzzle that included weather patterns, gravity effects, and environmental conditions as tactical elements. The third Vorthon transmission revealed the effectiveness of this approach. "Contact has eliminated Patrol Squadron Zeta 7. Unknown weapon systems, precision targeting despite storm interference. All units maintain defensive positions around priority targets." Chief Engineer Cole Thara monitored the technical aspects of Torres's fighter from his engineering station. "Her engine management is remarkable," he rumbled through the translation matrix. "She's using gravity wells and atmospheric currents to conserve fuel while maintaining combat speed. The fuel efficiency ratings are 30% better than our projections." Squadron Leader Vexhai had been analyzing the limited tactical data they were receiving. "Her attack patterns show no adherence to standard doctrines," he observed. "Each engagement appears to be improvised based on immediate environmental conditions." The Zolonians' assessment highlighted something crucial about human military thinking. While other species developed comprehensive tactical manuals and standardized procedures, human special operations forces were trained to adapt and improvise, based on rapidly changing conditions, Commander. Thax 9's attention was drawn to a new series of energy signatures, appearing on the long-range sensors. "Vorthon reinforcements are moving toward the combat zone," he announced. 3 additional fighter squadrons and 2 heavy interceptors. The monitoring team watched with growing tension as enemy forces converged on Torres's position. According to their tactical computers, she was now facing odds of approximately 15-1 against opponents with superior technology and local numerical advantage. It was then that something unprecedented appeared on their displays. Torres's fighter signal suddenly multiplied, showing what appeared to be dozens of identical energy signatures moving in coordinated attack patterns. The Vorthon forces found themselves tracking multiple targets that seemed to be attacking from impossible angles. "What are we seeing?" Dr. Vess asked, her voice tight with confusion. "Are those sensor ghosts?" Lieutenant Kexhai frantically adjusted the monitoring equipment. "Negative, Doctor. The readings are consistent with multiple active fighters, but we only deployed 1 aircraft." Commander Reese stepped forward with the first genuine smile he had shown since the mission began. "She's using the electrical storms to create false sensor returns," he explained. "The enemy thinks they're facing an entire squadron." The technique was brilliant in its simplicity. Torres was positioning her fighter so that the electrical discharges from the planet's storms created multiple radar signatures that appeared identical to her actual aircraft. The Vorthan forces were now trying to engage targets that existed only as electromagnetic echoes. The enemy communications became increasingly frantic. Multiple contacts engaging from all vectors. Unable to determine actual target count. Requesting immediate tactical support. What followed over the next hour was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Torres systematically eliminated the 17 priority targets while simultaneously evading and defeating superior enemy forces through tactics that combined environmental awareness, technological improvisation, and combat instincts that bordered on supernatural. Dr. Vest documented everything, her scientific training struggling to categorize what she was witnessing. "The reaction times we're measuring are consistently faster than should be physiologically possible," she reported. "It's as if she's responding to threats before they fully materialize." The explanation lay in human pattern recognition capabilities that had been honed through millions of years of evolution. Torres wasn't reacting to specific threats. She was reading the overall flow of the combat environment and positioning herself where threats were least likely to develop. By the third hour of the mission, the Vorthan forces had shifted to purely defensive positions. Their communications indicated a complete breakdown of tactical coordination as they struggled to counter an opponent who seemed to operate outside the boundaries of conventional military logic. Target 17 is confirmed destroyed, came Torres's first direct communication since entering the atmosphere. Her voice was calm and professional, showing no signs of stress despite having just completed what military historians would later describe as the most remarkable single-pilot combat mission on record. Commander Thax 9 found himself experiencing emotions that had no direct translation in his language. The combination of professional admiration, species-specific pride, and something approaching awe created a psychological state that Zolonian military doctrine had never prepared him to process. All primary objectives completed, Torres continued over the communication link, beginning extraction sequence. Vorthan forces are withdrawing to defensive positions around their main base. The monitoring team watched as Torres's fighter began its ascent through the planet's atmosphere, using the same storm systems that had provided concealment during her attack runs to mask her departure. The entire mission had taken less than 4 hours, exactly as she had predicted. Dr. Vess was already compiling her preliminary reports, knowing that the scientific implications of what they had witnessed would revolutionize understanding of human capabilities in extreme environments. "Commander Thax 9, she said quietly, "I believe we need to revise our assessment of human military potential." The Zolonian commander's scales had shifted to deep purple, a color that indicated profound respect among his species. "Dr. Vess," he replied, "I believe we need to revise our assessment of what's possible." As Torres's fighter broke through the upper atmosphere and began its return journey to the GSS Meridian, every being in the monitoring center understood they had witnessed something that would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The mission had succeeded not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because of something uniquely human: the ability to see solutions where others saw only impossible problems. The debriefing session aboard the GSS Meridian had been scheduled for 2 hours, but it stretched well into the ship's night cycle, as military analysts from 12 different species struggled to comprehend what Lieutenant Torres had accomplished. The main conference room was packed beyond capacity, with observers attending virtually from across the Alliance fleet. Torres sat at the center of the attention, with the same quiet composure she had shown throughout the mission. Her flight suit had been replaced with a standard uniform, and the only visible sign of the intense combat operation was a slight fatigue around her dark eyes. Commander Thax 9 opened the session by displaying a comprehensive tactical analysis that his staff had compiled during Torres's return flight. The mission parameters suggested a 12% survival probability, he began, his forearms gesturing toward the holographic displays. Instead, we achieved 100% objective completion with zero friendly casualties and minimal collateral damage. Admiral Korvash, a massive hegemony fleet commander attending via holographic link, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Commander Thax 9, these results seem inconsistent with our understanding of single-pilot operational capabilities. Are we certain this mission was completed by one individual? Torres spoke for the first time since the debriefing began. Admiral, I can provide detailed tactical logs and biometric data for independent verification. The Admiral's expression remained doubtful. Lieutenant Torres, our combat simulations indicate that the engagement sequences you described would require reaction times below biological thresholds. How do you explain this discrepancy? Dr. Vess intervened with her preliminary scientific analysis. Admiral, I've been studying Lieutenant Torres's physiological data throughout the mission. What we're seeing appears to be an extreme example of what human psychologists call flow state, ATD, condition where conscious thought processes are bypassed in favor of intuitive response. Patterns and squadron leader Vexhai had been studying the tactical recordings with his entire pilot corps. The maneuvering patterns show no adherence to standard evasion protocols, he observed. Each movement appears to be improvised based on immediate environmental conditions rather than predetermined tactical responses. Torres nodded acknowledgement. Standard evasion patterns are predictable to enemy targeting systems. In high-threat environments, survival depends on being unpredictable while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Chief Engineer Colthera raised one of his 6 arms to gain attention. Lieutenant Torres, your fighter's performance data shows engine modifications that shouldn't be possible with current technology. The power output ratios exceed manufacturer specifications by significant margins. Human engineering philosophy differs from most species, Torres explained. We tend to push systems beyond their designed limitations when mission requirements demand it. The engine modifications were within acceptable stress tolerances for short-duration operations. The statement caused considerable discussion among the alien engineers present. Most species designed their technology with substantial safety margins and considered operating beyond specifications to be dangerous and unprofessional. Dr. Vess had been analyzing comparison data from other species' pilot performance metrics. What's remarkable is that Lieutenant Torres's approach seems to treat unpredictable environmental conditions as advantages rather than obstacles. This represents a fundamental cognitive difference in problem-solving methodology. Admiral Korvash's holographic image flickered as he accessed additional data streams. Dr. Vess, are you suggesting that humans have evolved cognitive advantages for operating in chaotic environments? Not advantages, Admiral, Dr. Vess replied carefully. Adaptations. Humans evolved on a planet with highly variable environmental conditions. Their neural architecture appears optimized for rapid adaptation rather than specialized performance in stable conditions. Elder Fluxdena of the Aquari delegation had been notably quiet throughout the debriefing. When he finally spoke, his translated words carried unusual weight. Lieutenant Torres, in our species-long history, we have encountered many forms of intelligence. What you demonstrated today suggests that human consciousness operates according to principles we do not fully understand. Torres considered the Elder's observation thoughtfully. With respect, Elder Fluxdena, I'm not sure we understand it ourselves. Human military training focuses on developing instinctive responses rather than conscious decision-making processes. We call it training until it becomes second nature. The Kithara delegation had been conducting rapid subsonic consultations throughout the debriefing. Their spokesperson, Hivemind Kextra, finally addressed the room with obvious frustration. This contradicts fundamental principles of tactical optimization. How can instinctive responses be more effective than calculated strategic analysis? Commander Reese stepped forward to field this question, his years of experience with alien military philosophy evident in his response. Hivemind Kextra, calculated analysis requires time. In high-speed combat situations, the pilot who spends time calculating optimal responses is the pilot who gets shot down. But surely your computers can calculate faster than biological intuition. Pressed the Kithara representative. Torres shook her head slightly. Computers can calculate known variables very quickly, but combat environments contain too many unknown factors. Human intuition processes pattern recognition and environmental cues that can't be programmed into tactical computers. Admiral Corvash had been reviewing additional mission data during the discussion. Lieutenant Torres, our analysis shows that you eliminated enemy fighters using weapon systems that should have been insufficient for the task. How do you account for this apparent impossibility? Admiral, the weapons weren't insufficient, Torres replied. They were optimized for precision rather than raw destructive power. Fourth-hand fighters have specific structural vulnerabilities that can be exploited with accurate targeting of critical systems. She activated her personal datapad and projected technical diagrams showing fourth-hand fighter designs. Most pilots target the largest or most obvious components. I targeted connection points, power relays, and control surfaces that would disable the aircraft without requiring massive explosive force. Chief Engineer Colthera studied the targeting analysis with growing amazement. This level of technical knowledge would require extensive study of enemy engineering principles. How did you acquire such detailed information? Torres's expression showed a hint of amusement. I spent the flight time studying enemy fighter configurations, using the reconnaissance data we gathered earlier. Humans are good at identifying patterns and weaknesses in complex systems. The statement caused another stir among the alien personnel. The idea of conducting detailed technical analysis while simultaneously engaging in high-speed combat was beyond their understanding of multitasking capabilities. Dr. Vess had been taking continuous notes throughout the session. Lieutenant Torres, from a scientific perspective, what you're describing suggests that human consciousness can operate on multiple parallel processing levels simultaneously. This has significant implications for our understanding of biological intelligence. Squadron Leader Vexhai raised a tactical question that had been puzzling his entire pilot corps. Lieutenant, the electromagnetic spoofing technique you used to create multiple false targets, is this a standard human tactical procedure? It's an adaptation of standard electronic warfare principles, Torres explained. Human pilots are trained to use available environmental conditions as tactical resources. The electrical storms provided an opportunity for sensor manipulation that seemed worth exploiting. Admiral Corvash's image leaned back as he processed this information. You improvised an entirely new tactical technique during active combat operations? Yes, sir, Torres replied simply. Mission requirements demanded maximum effectiveness with available resources. The casual way she described revolutionary tactical innovation highlighted something fundamental about human military thinking. Where other species developed comprehensive doctrine and standardized procedures, humans seem to treat every engagement as a unique problem requiring creative solutions. Elder Fluxdena's tentacles moved in patterns that indicated deep contemplation. Lieutenant Torres, does human military training specifically prepare pilots for situations that have never been encountered before? Torres nodded. That's exactly what it does, Elder. We train for uncertainty itself rather than specific scenarios. The goal is to develop adaptive thinking that can function effectively, regardless of the specific challenges encountered. Commander Thax 9 had been studying comparative analysis data throughout the debriefing. Dr. Vess, what are the implications of this cognitive approach for Alliance military doctrine? Dr. Vess looked up from her extensive notes. Commander, I believe we're seeing evidence that human military effectiveness isn't based on superior technology or physical capabilities. It's based on cognitive flexibility that allows them to find solutions in situations where other species see only insurmountable problems. The room fell silent as the assembled military leaders contemplated this assessment. 6 months after the Kepler 442b mission, the Alliance Military Academy on Centauri Prime had become an unlikely gathering place for the most elite pilots from across known space. The Torres Protocol, as it had become known throughout military circles, was being tested and refined through an unprecedented cross-species training program. Lieutenant Torres, now promoted to Lieutenant Commander, stood before a mixed group of alien pilots in the Academy's Advanced Simulation Center. The room buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 17 different species prepared for training exercises that challenged every assumption they held about atmospheric combat. Today, we're going to practice something that your tactical computers will tell you is impossible, Torres began, her calm voice carrying easily through the translation matrices. We're going to learn to fight using environmental conditions as weapons rather than obstacles. Squadron Leader Vexhai, who had volunteered for the program despite his senior rank, raised one of his 4 arms. Commander Torres, Our preliminary simulations suggest that Zolonian physiology cannot withstand the acceleration forces required for these maneuvers. Torres nodded acknowledgement. Squadron leader, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need to change. The goal isn't to copy human techniques exactly. It's to find ways for each species to apply adaptive thinking within their own capabilities. She activated the simulation system, and the room transformed into a virtual representation of a storm-racked planet, similar to Kepler 442b. The key principle is pattern recognition, rather than force application. Watch the environmental data streams and look for opportunities rather than obstacles. Dr. Vess, who had been documenting the training program for the Alliance Science Council, observed from the control booth. What's remarkable is how the training methodology adapts to different species' cognitive architectures, she noted to her research team. Torres isn't teaching specific techniques, she's teaching a way of thinking. The first simulation run was predictably chaotic. Pilots trained in conventional tactics found themselves overwhelmed by the rapidly changing environmental conditions. Kythera pilots, despite their superior reaction times, struggled with the unpredictable nature of the challenges. Aquari pilots, accustomed to fluid dynamics, performed better, but still relied too heavily on calculated responses. Torres watched the results without criticism, her expression thoughtful. "Let's analyze what happened," she said as the simulation ended. "Who can tell me what the primary failure point was?" Pilot Kremtha of the Hegemony Forces raised a tentacle. "Commander, we were fighting against the storm systems rather than adapting to them." "Exactly," Torres confirmed. "Now let's try something different. This time, don't plan your attack runs. Instead, wait for the environmental conditions to show you opportunities." The concept was alien to most military thinking, which emphasized careful planning and systematic execution. The idea of allowing chaotic conditions to dictate tactical decisions seemed to contradict everything they had learned about military discipline. Commander Reese entered the simulation center as the second run began. His weathered features showed satisfaction as he watched alien pilots beginning to grasp concepts that human special operations forces considered fundamental. "How are they adapting to the training?" he asked Dr. Vess. "Surprisingly well," Dr. Vess replied. "The Aquari pilots are showing particular aptitude for environmental adaptation. Their natural comfort with fluid dynamics seems to translate well to atmospheric combat in chaotic conditions." On the simulation floor, something remarkable was happening. Pilot Fluxnari, a young Aquari who had initially struggled with human tactical concepts, suddenly began moving through the virtual storm system with unprecedented grace. Instead of fighting the turbulence, she was using the energy flows to accelerate her fighter and position herself for optimal attack angles. "Outstanding," Torres called out over the communication system. "Pilot Fluxnari, describe what you're feeling right now." "Commander, it's like swimming in a current." Fluxnari's translated voice carried excitement. "I stopped trying to control the movement and started feeling where the energy wanted to go." The breakthrough moment was infectious. Other pilots began experimenting with similar approaches, each adapting the core concepts to their species' natural abilities. The Kythera pilots discovered that their collective consciousness could process environmental patterns faster than individual awareness. The Zolonian pilots found that their crystalline neural structure could detect electromagnetic patterns in the storm, systems that other species missed entirely. Admiral Korvash arrived for his scheduled observation of the training program, his massive frame filling the entrance to the simulation center. "Commander Torres," he said formally, "the Alliance Command Council has requested a full assessment of the program's effectiveness." Torres paused the simulation and turned to address the Admiral. "Sir, the results exceed our initial projections. We're seeing improvement rates of 300% in adaptive combat scenarios across all participating species." "How do you account for such dramatic improvement?" Admiral Korvash asked, genuine curiosity evident in his tone. "Admiral, we're not teaching new skills," Torres explained. "We're teaching pilots to use abilities they already possess but have been trained to suppress in favor of standardized procedures." Dr. Vess joined the conversation with her preliminary research findings. "Admiral, what Commander Torres has developed isn't just military training. It's a cognitive restructuring program that enhances intuitive decision-making across species boundaries." The implications were staggering. If the Torres Protocol could be successfully implemented across Alliance forces, it would represent the most significant advancement in military capability since the development of faster-than-light travel. Squadron leader HFY approached after completing his simulation run, his crystalline scale showing colors that indicated profound satisfaction. Commander Torres, I believe I'm beginning to understand what humans call thinking outside the box. Torres smiled at the translator's attempt to render the human idiom. Squadron leader, you're learning to think without the box entirely. As the training session concluded, pilots from across the galaxy gathered around Torres with questions, observations, and requests for additional guidance. The quiet lieutenant who had once stood and walked away from a briefing had become the focal point for a revolution in military thinking. Commander Reese watched the interactions with obvious pride. Lieutenant Commander, he said quietly, I believe you've started something that's going to change how warfare is conducted throughout the galaxy. Torres looked around at the mixed group of alien pilots, each now carrying with them concepts that would filter back to their home fleets and military academies. Sir, I think we've just proven that the best weapon any species can have is the willingness to adapt when everyone else insists on following the rules. 6 months later, Alliance forces would credit the Torres Protocol with decisive victories in 3 major campaigns. Military historians would mark the Kepler 442b mission as the moment when human adaptability became recognized as one of the galaxy's most potent strategic assets. But for Torres, the most satisfying outcome was much simpler. Pilots who had once seen impossible situations were now seeing interesting challenges. In a galaxy full of advanced technology and specialized evolution, humanity's gift for finding solutions where others saw only problems had finally found its proper recognition. The quiet pilot had taught the galaxy that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the refusal to accept that something cannot be done.